Hey, this is Bob from INSYDIUM, and this is part 4 of our particle Christmas tree tutorial series. And in this video, we're going to look at the technique used to create the grey particles here. So what we're going to do is set up a sweep around one of our scene helixes. We're going to create a noise material, emit particles from that noise, and then reverse the sim. Here we are in our scene so far then, and we've got two particle systems working here. We've got our detailed particle system, which is our XP system flow spline, which is giving us these nice kind of wavy detailed particles. And then lower down we've got our system spline wrap, which are our more kind of ribbons of snow particles with our coloured baubles which make their way up. Now obviously we'll be retiming all of this to make sure they're animating all at the same time correctly, but we're starting to get our particle Christmas tree. The final system we need to make is one more system which is going to provide us with a little bit more of this type of wispy turbulent detail. So let's get cracking with that. So we will switch off our system flow spline and our system spline wrap, and at the moment we just have our mid helix visible in our viewport, and this is actually what we're going to use to create this new system. So what we'll do is let's go to INSYDIUM, X particles, bring in a new system. This system, let's go to the basic tab and rename it, and we'll call this one texture emit, which is a clue to what's going to be going on here. And then in the object tab of the system, let's change the color so we can just differentiate it between the others. Something like that, don't know, purple will do. Okay, so what we want to do is we've got our new system here. Let's just bring it down to the bottom of our object manager. Okay, so we have this system and we have an emitter, and what we're going to use, as I said, is this helix mid. But we need to create some geometry first because we're going to emit particles from an animated texture, which is going to give us a really nice kind of different look from the other particles that we've already got simulated. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to create some geometry based on this helix spline. So we're going to do that with a sweep. So let's go to our Cinema 4D menu here and bring in a sweep. There we go. And let's put that into our system utilities. So a sweep requires two splines. It requires a spline, which is kind of like the path of the object, and it requires a profile. So let's bring in the profile first. The profile will just be we can bring in a rectangle spline, and let's put that into our sweep. Now this is too big at the moment, this rectangle spline, it's huge. We want the height to be maybe just 1 centimetre, maybe a bit more. We could maybe go 3. And we want the width to be, let's try 30. Here it is here. So this is a little bit narrow. We want to make a kind of a ribbon. Let's try 80. That looks nice, and I think we could just go 5 centimeters on the height. Okay, so now if we take our helix mid, so I don't want to drag this one out of our organizational hierarchy here, so I'm going to just copy it. So let's hold control, copy that mid and stick it below the rectangle in the sweep. Oh, we've duplicated the rectangle there. Let's just delete that. So we can close that one down and close this null. So we can see that this is working. We've got our geometry that has been created, but it's being kind of twisted and we want this to remain flat. So we adjust that in our sweep settings. Let's go to the sweep, and then if we come down, look, you can see we've got a details section here which we can open up. And in that details section, we've got a couple of things. Now, we need to use the scale. So this is saying the width of our square spline at the beginning of our helix, which is here, is going to be full. And then as we make our way along the helix spline, it's still going to be full. But if we pull this down, you'll see it's going to taper off as it gets to the tip. And that's kind of what we want, really. We want it to taper away to a point. So that looks good. So now we need to sort out the fact that this seems twisted. We want it to be flat. We can do that with the rotation. And what we can do is, look, if we pull this point right down to the bottom, we pull this rotation up, and then we start twisting it down you're going to see that we're going to be able to flatten it and keep it flat. So something like that is now working for us. Now this isn't going to be visible in the render, so we don't need to be absolutely precise with this, but that's going to work fine for our sweep. So now we want to emit particles from this sweep. So we can go to our emitter, to the Object tab, and change the default shape from rectangle to object. And now it says what object do you want to emit from. So let's drag in the sweep. And we can emit from, let's emit from polygon area at the moment. We're going to be changing this anyway, but we'll just do it from polygon area so we can have a look at what's happening. So if we hit play, now we've got particles emitting from that sweep and they're flying off in all directions. So let's go to our emission tab and let's take off all of the particle speed, remove it. So now we just have those emitting on the surface. Okay, so now if we bring in a gravity modifier, let's go to our modifiers menu, motion modifiers, and let's go to, where are we, gravity. This is going to be way too strong. Let's put this down to say, I don't know, something like 100. And if we hit play now, those particles are falling down with that gravitational force. So let's give them, at the moment, they're just living forever. So let's give them take the full lifespan off. And let's say they can live for maybe 80 frames with 10 frames variation either side. All right. Excellent. And we could also add some more movement. Let's go to the modifiers, motion modifiers. We'll bring in a turbulence. So now they've got some turbulence movement. Let's reduce the scale down by half to 50. And we could make that turbulence a bit stronger. Let's just make that 20. That might be a little bit too strong. Let's put it just down at 10 for now. All right, so we've got this basic emission of particles, but it's not looking right yet. And what we're going to do is, at the moment, it's just emitting from all over the surface of our sweep. But actually, we want it to emit from just little spots of that sweep. And we're going to do that with an animated texture. So let's go to our materials manager, and here are our Cycles 4D materials that we're using in our other systems. But we want to use a material to let X particles emit from it. So we'll just use a Cinema 4D material for that. So we can just double click in this material manager and it brings up a Cinema 4D material. Let's put this onto our sweep. And in this material, let's double click to open up its properties. We can take off reflectance, we don't need that. And in the color channel, we're going to go to the texture channel and we're going to use a noise. So let's put a noise in here. And then let's click on this noise. And we can change the space from texture to the 2D one, UV, because this is what X particles uses to emit from. So we'll click on that. And then look, let's reduce this relative scale. So you see it's stretched at the moment. Our noise is stretched around. Look, if we crush, if we increase the low clip and reduce the high clip, see we're crushing it way down. But you can see it's kind of stretched around our geometry. So if we reduce the Y relative scale, let's put that down to say 10%. Now we've got this kind of speckly look. So let's just crush that a bit. And if we right click here and hit animate, we're going to view any animation that we put on. Now this doesn't have any animation yet, so it's static. But look, if we go to our animate speed, let's put this on, let's try 0.5. And now you can see, look, it's cycling through that noise. So let's turn animate off. Right, so if we hit play, we're not going to see that noise animating in our viewport, but that's just because by default the animation is set to be switched off. To activate it in the viewport, we need to go to our viewport settings in the material, and look, we can just animate preview. Okay, so then we can switch that off. Now hit play, and you'll see that our noise, let's switch that emitter off. You see the noise, look, is animating. So what we want to do is animate from these white bits. So we'll do that by going to our emitter. Let's switch it back on again. Go to the Object tab, and instead of emitting from the polygon area, we're going to emit from a texture. And now look, we've got a texture tab that has appeared. So if we click on this, it's saying which texture tag do you want to emit from? Well, it's this one on the sweep. So let's drag that in. And what this is saying is it's going to use the color channel for the emit channel. So where there are white parts of the texture, it'll emit particles, and where it's black, it won't. And it's also going to color the particles based on this texture. So look, if we hit play, now we're getting particles just falling out from those white portions. So let's make this look a little bit more obvious, and we can do it by adjusting the particle size and increasing the quantity. So let's go to the emitter, to the display tab, and change the editor display from squares to dots. And then let's go to the emission tab, and let's just emit loads more. We'll be doing a lot more than this actually eventually, but let's just put it on 15,000, and we're going to start seeing the effect that we're going for here. So that's looking good. We're getting all of this kind of wispy movement already, and that's looking great. But we're missing, it's actually moving a little bit too quickly, isn't it? So what we're going to do is, before we bring in the next kind of dynamics to this, we're just going to clamp the speed of these particles a bit. So let's go to our modifiers. We're going to do this with a speed mod. So let's go to the motion modifiers. Let's bring in a speed, and we'll have this speed calculating under the rest of the modifiers. And what we'll do in the speed, we'll leave it on the default incremental, but we'll switch the speed value off, so it's not increasing speed at all. If we hit play now, it's going to look exactly the same. But what we're able to do is activate a clamp for the max speed, and let's clamp this down quite low, maybe 85. So let's have a look. So yeah, now that we've clamped that, we're getting this nice swirling particles. That's looking pretty cool. And if we go to our emitter, emission, and we emit more, let's put this up to 50,000. Now we're starting to get quite a nice, interesting looking emission. But we're going to add one more bit of motion to this, because these are just falling down and being moved around by our turbulence. But it'd be nice if we could get them to respect the swirling shape of our helix. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to use a flow field object and create a custom velocity field in the shape of that helix. So let's go to our dynamics folder, and we'll choose a dynamics. We'll bring in an XP flow field. There we go. So the velocity field is going to be created within the bounds of this box. So let's just make sure, it doesn't have to be exact, but make sure that we're fully encasing our tree. There we go, something like that. Okay, so at the moment we've got these random velocity vectors which are going to make our particles kind of shufty around in a random way. That's not what we want. We want them to kind of spiral downwards. So let's go to our flow field and get rid of this random layer that comes in it by default. And we want to use an along spline. We want them to go along this our helix spline. So let's go to our layers list, and we'll pick an along spline. There it is. And the spline, we need, with it selected, we need to go down to its layer options, and we need to know what spline it's referencing. So let's drag in our helix mid. At the moment there is a fall off, so the closer the particles are to the spline, the more flow field force there is, and then it falls off to the particles have no kind of spiral force the further they get away from that spline. And that's not actually what we want. We want them just to have a consistent spiral force within this. So let's just switch off the fall off. And we need to do one more thing, because at the moment our spline is going to be forcing, the direction of it is going to be forcing the particles up, but then they're kind of fighting with the gravity which is pulling them down. And we actually just want them to come down. So we need to invert the flow field force. So we can do that by just clicking on invert here in our flow field. All right, let's maybe reduce the cell size, which will make it a more detailed velocity field, and we'll increase the strength maybe to 30%. And now let's see, so we should have them, yeah, look, we've got that nice spiraling motion respected now. That's looking really cool. So let's make our flow field invisible. And let's have a look at what adjustments we can make. So we need our particles to be living for longer. They're dying off too early. So let's go to our emitter, emission tab, and let's give them a 200 frame lifespan. We could go to our gravity and maybe have the gravity slightly stronger. Let's make this 150. And our turbulence could be stronger now. Now that we've got the flow field affecting that, we could make this get a bit more angry. Let's try putting this up to 30. And now we're getting some really interesting kind of wispy motion from those particles. That's looking pretty good. All right, so we're pretty much there with this, with the general setup of this rig. Now we need to set up different emitters for our different particle types. So in this we want some snow particles, obviously, but we also want our kind of fairy light particles as well. So now that we've got that rig set up, let's look at getting these specific particle emitters set up, and then we can move on to caching and rendering. So first of all, let's go to our XP emitter and we'll go to the basic tab and let's call this one emitter snow. And we can duplicate this emitter now, holding control, drag it down. There's our duplicate. Let's call that one emitter lights. All right, and we can steal the render elements that we set up in our previous tutorial in our spline wrap system. So let's close down that dynamics. We'll open up our spline wrap system and let's just close down the folders that we don't need to look at to make it easier to see. And we need to see our emitters. All right, so in our previous system, we set up and cached our snow, lights and baubles emitter. So we just need the snow and the light settings. So with our snow one, we need this cycles instance tag that we set up. Let's hold control, drag it down to make a copy and put it on our new emitter snow. And then let's get the lights one as well. So that's there. Let's hold control and copy one of those down to our new lights. Okay, now we've done that, we can just close up that system spline wrap. Okay, so our snow is got this instance tag and it's a cycles instance tag, and we've got these 10 join objects which are in our objects window. And that means for every snow particle that's emitted, cycles will randomly pick one of these objects and render that instead of a sphere. And these are all just slightly different deformed spheres to look like chunks. And they exist here. They're in our lights folder in our XP joins here. Look, and here's an example of one of them, a sphere, and it's deformed by a displacer, and it has our translucent material on it. So they're all automatically set up for us. Let's go to that though, and actually we're going to reduce the size of this way down, and let's put this on, say 5. We don't need these chunks to be as big as they were in our spline wrap system, so just put those down a bit. And then in the emitter lights, we can just leave those as is. These emitter lights, because they're not referencing an object, they're just going to make a default sphere. The emitter itself needs a material on it. So let's go to our material manager, drag in our emission, which is our light material, stick it on there, and then that is ready to go. Okay, so let's have a look. In our emitter snow, let's go to the emission tab. We want more than 50,000 particles. Let's try 150,000. And we might alter that. And then in the lights, we need hardly any lights. Let's go to emission. We've got it set to 50,000. I'm guessing we're going to need about maybe 200. All right, and we can make our sweep object here invisible. We don't need to see that anymore. So let's go into our utilities and make that sweep invisible. All right, let's hit play. Let's just get that gravity. We can hide the modifiers as well so we can't see those. Okay, let's hit play. And now we've got these particles moving downwards, looking really cool. Now we also need to sort out all of these kind of stragglers down here. We don't need that, and we can just brute force this. Let's go to our modifiers. Let's go to a control modifier, and we want a kill. And the kill, we get this bounds, and by default the kill modifier is set to outside the bounds, so when the particles stray outside the box, they'll be killed. So let's just move this up. Well, actually, we could make it smaller, don't we? We don't need it to be anywhere near as big as that. Let's make it smaller, just to be tidy. And so when these particles move outside of these bounds, they will be killed. So something like that. And just so we can have a look at where this should be stopping, let's make that sweep just visible momentarily. And we'll go back to the first frame. So we want this kill to be, they can come down a little bit further than the spline, but not too much. Something like that is going to work well. Okay, good. So we'll make those modifiers invisible again. We'll make our sweep invisible again. And let's go back to the beginning of the frame, of the scene, and there we go. So we've got our particles coming down, they're getting killed off when they get to the bottom, they're rotating around. This is looking really cool. So let's see now what our render is going to look like. So we'll go to INSYDIUM, Cycles, Real-Time Preview. There it is. Let's just press pause and we'll go forwards until we've got some particles in our scene, maybe up to frame 150, something like that. Okay. Now let's hit play and see what we are getting. So we've got our particles, they're looking pretty good. We've got our lights, and let's just let this chug through some of those samples because it will lighten up as it processes the 20 samples that we've got set for this. It'll kind of get brighter and brighter. So this is looking nice. Let's keep going with that. I think that is looking really cool as is, so I'm not going to make any adjustments to that. Excellent. So what we could do now is think about getting these cached. So we'll go to our utilities folder. Let's go to the utilities, bring in a cache object. The cache object here is going to cache these particles to external files, so it'll have a file every frame. It's saving it to My Documents, but you obviously put it in somewhere that makes sense to your project by selecting a folder here, and that is going to be fine. So let's hit, or actually before we hit Build Cache, look, let's make sure that we've clicked only in same system, so it won't try and add another cache tag to the emitters in our other systems. Okay, that's good. Let's go back to the beginning, hit Build Cache. So this is going to fly through quite quick, be a couple of minutes I think, but we'll just pause it there and I'll come back to you when that's finished. And that took 2 minutes and 23 seconds to cache, and now because that's cached we can just scrub right through. So what we're going to do with this, actually, if we hit play, this isn't actually how this is going to look in our scene. We're going to do a couple of cool things with this cache to make it right. We are actually going to reverse the cache first because we want the particles to be floating upwards. So if we go to our cache, we can go to the playback tab and we can go to the scale, and the scale is kind of the playback speed, and 100% it just plays forwards at 100% speed. But if we put minus 100%, you'll see that the cache will run in reverse. And the really cool illusion is that now these particles are floating up as if they're going towards the tree to their emission points. And it's a really cool look, a cheeky look, a cheeky technique, but it looks fantastic. So what we could also do, I can see here that this is running way too quickly. So let's just retime this cache a little. We want it to be running a bit more slowly. So let's go to our cache, and instead of it being minus 100, let's say minus 60, which is almost half speed. Let's have a look. Yeah, that's a much better speed for us, I think. Cool. So what we'll do is we'll set a render going at, we only really need to render, let's just render 120 frames, 4 seconds worth of this. That'll do fine for us. So with that in mind, let's just get this positioned so we can have a look. There we go, something like that. Let's go to our our render menu. We want to edit our render settings. Now we'll keep our Cycles 4D render settings that we had from our previous setup. The only thing we need to change is, look, we'll render from frame 0 and we'll render to frame 120. And let's just double check our cycle settings. We have optics selected, and we are going to be doing 20 samples, and everything else is default. Okay, so that's looking good. So let's go to render to picture viewer. Yeah. And this will start rendering away. So we'll leave that chugging away, and we'll come back to you when it's finished, tell you how long it took, and have a look at that motion. So we'll stop that rendering after just over 90 frames. That's giving us just over 3 seconds. It took just under 20 minutes to render, and by the time we switched my screen recording stuff off, we were getting between about 10 and 11 seconds per frame. So not too bad. Let's have a look at this motion then. We'll hit play, and now that we have reversed this simulation and we've slowed it down a bit, we're getting this fantastic wispy detail that's kind of looking kind of noisy and quite random, but it's spiraling upwards along with the rest of our tree. So that is our third particle simulation technique that we have done. Now in the next video, we'll take this along with the other 2 techniques. We'll manage to sync them all up together so they're working together, and we'll be able to do our final combination render with all 3.